The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, we'll revisit our conversation with neuroscientist and musician Daniel Levitin on what effect music has on the brain. Then, we took our cameras to Ontario's dairy country to find out how milk gets from our farms to our dinner plates. That's all next on The Agenda. We've had a lot of neuroscientists on this program over the years, but I dare say we've had only one who regularly hangs out with the likes of Joni Mitchell, Sting, Paul Simon, Stevie Wonder, and Bobby McFerrin, and can play the sax, guitar, and bass. Daniel Levitin is fascinated by the effect of music on the brain, and he has written another book exploring that connection. It's called I Heard There Was a Secret Chord, and it brings Daniel Levitin back to our studio tonight. It's great to see you again.
It's great to be back.
I don't know how many appearances this is for you on our program. Probably 4 or 5, something like that. Every time you come out with a new book, we like to have you in. Before I start with the book, you're from California and you're wearing a Canadian flag on your lapel, and I got to find out why that is.
I had been at McGill for a few years, and when Michaëlle Jean was Governor General, she came to visit. Heather Monroe Bloom was principal and brought her to my lab. And Governor General Jean said, "Are you a citizen?" And I said, "No." She said, "How long you been here?" I said, 4 years. She said, "You have to become a citizen." And so I did. I applied for citizenship, and she came to the ceremony and gave me this pin.
Come on. That's pretty special.
It's a pretty special pin. I'm told it's not the regular pin. It means a lot to me to be Canadian. My grandfather was born in Toronto. I made my career at McGill, and it's very important to me.
Marvelous. All right, let's do an excerpt from your book as we start to think about the secret chord that you were referring to. Sheldon, if you would, bring the graphic up. We may think of science and art as standing in opposition to one another, but they are bound by a common objective. Science seeks to find truth in the natural world. Art seeks to find truth in the emotional world. Medicine fits somewhere in between, bridging science, art, and the emotions that move us toward the will to survive, to heal, to take our medicine, to exercise, and to put in motion all those things that keep us healthy.
It really sounds better when you read it.
Let's start with music. Is it a science? Is it an art? Is it medicine? Where is it on that continuum?
I think it's all of them. Why does it have to be just one?
Doesn't?
Going back to Pythagoras, of course, there's the science of how the overtone series works. Certainly, musicologists take a scientific approach to understanding how music is composed and performed. Empirical musicologists and music neuroscientists like myself take a scientific approach to understanding how it creates the effects it does emotionally and cognitively. And certainly, it's unequivocally an art. And it's an interesting art form. It's the only art form that causes your body to move. You don't look at a painting and want to twitch and dance and,
But you do with music.
Yeah.
You do. All right, let's pursue this notion of music and the effect it has on the brain. And you refer to this in your book where somebody sings Happy Birthday at a party, someone starts it, they set the key, everybody else pretty much joins in, and they join in key. How does that happen?
Isn't that fascinating?
It is.
And there's no reason that it should. The Gestalt psychologists back in 1890 posed this problem. A song, they said, is an auditory object composed of pitches, but you can change every single pitch and it's still the same song. How does that happen? Well, the brain has giant pattern detectors. If nothing else, that's what the brain is. It is itself a giant pattern detector. And so it seeks to find order in the world. If you've ever laid on your back on a sunny day and looked at the clouds and you've seen bunny rabbits and things, it's your brain imposing some sort of order on what is a disordered world. So we see the pattern of pitches, we create a mental representation of the melody, and then that is shiftable in pitch space and in temporal space. I can drag it out. Happy birthday, doing really slow, and you still recognize it.
You sounded like Marilyn Monroe to JFK there for a second. Well, a little bit, a little bit.
Mr. President.
Yeah. How is it possible that some very musical people can hear music, they dance perfectly to the beat, they know the songs, when they sing them, every note sounds the same?
Yeah, so there's been a lot written about this, and I dubbed this back in the 90s a kind of tune deafness. It's not tone deafness because they can hear the difference between the tones, but they're tune deaf, particularly when they're singing. So one possibility is that they just lack precise control over the vocal folds, that they just never learned how to match a pitch they hear in their head with their muscle. And, you know, it's like learning to bat when you're a kid, right? You don't always hit the ball. You've got to learn how to coordinate your movements. Another possibility, not mutually exclusive, is that they have what we call a self-monitoring deficit, which is that they don't realize they're not singing the pitches.
Interesting. Okay. Again, I know this from the book.
You said interesting, but it sounds like you weren't really interested. Sounds like you were moving on.
No, on the contrary. Well, I can find it both interesting and yet need to move on at the same time. This is the nature of an interview.
Yeah, thank you.
When I read about your wife, Heather, I thought, okay, she and I have something in common here, because I'd be really good at that game, Name That Tune. You remember that? Where
Yeah.
I know a song after 2 or 3 notes.
Da, da, da.
Star Spangled Banner.
I was thinking All of Me, but...
Oh, that too.
Yeah.
Okay, works both ways. But lyrics, I am having a devil of a time remembering the lyrics to songs that I knew the lyrics of completely back in the day. How can I be so good at one aspect of memory but not at the other?
Yeah, and my wife Heather doesn't know any lyrics at all. She just hears the melody. And she can do that, Name That Tune in 3 notes just from the melody. You know, different people have different foci, different things about music that grab them. It can be rhythm, it can be the timbre, the sound of Johnny Cash's voice is just, you know, what you tune into. It can be the lyrics. And then I think what you're describing is a declining over time.
Yes.
Cognizance or memory for the lyrics.
Not for the tune, though. The tune's there.
Yeah.
But the words.
So from a cognitive neuroscience perspective, the tune is a highly structured medium. There are only 12 notes, and Carol Krumhansel and others have shown that even the average non-musician listener has a very highly sophisticated, basically statistical detector that knows which notes are likely to follow which. And so that gives you a leg up because there are these probabilities about what notes follow which. And then every once in a while, the composer surprises you and throws in a note that you didn't expect, and that's memorable because it's surprising. Lyrics are less constrained, they're less structured. And so that's probably one of the reasons that they slip out.
I feel embarrassed that you went bum, 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 and I didn't think of Sinatra and All of Me.
Well,
but it's because you're from the States, and so I immediately thought of the Star Spangled Banner. Ella Fitzgerald's Mac the Knife. This is a great story.
Yeah.
She forgot the words, and it ended up being utterly memorable. What happened?
This is one of the most extraordinary things, and what cognitive neuroscientists like myself like to do is find failures of human cognition, because it's a window into how the whole thing works. Usually when something breaks, you get a glimpse into the underlying mechanisms. So my colleague Danny Kahneman, for example, I worked in his lab when I was a student. He spent his career studying the foibles of decision-making by studying how people make bad decisions. Here we've got a wonderful insight into memory by somebody who lost hers temporarily. Ella is singing Mac the Knife at Berlin in front of a live audience. She's at the peak of her career. And she forgets the words, but what does she remember? She remembers the melody, she remembers the rhythm, the beat, the accents. She's swinging along with the song, and she even remembers the rhyme scheme. So as she starts improvising lyrics, she maintains the meter and the rhyme scheme. It's extraordinary. And it became so well known because of just the sheer imaginativeness and brilliance of her being able to ensure that the show must go on. She doesn't stop and ask somebody for the lyrics. She knows her job is to entertain, and boy, does she.
How she did that, like, we'll never know, right? Well, you'll know because you know what's going on in the brain. You play guitar.
I do.
Carlos Santana says you play the guitar with an accent. What does he mean by that?
He and I worked in the studio together in San Francisco, and I had the privilege of being in the room when he was recording, I was a recording engineer and producer, and one day we were in adjacent studios at the Automat, which was the old CBS studios in San Francisco, and he had come in to borrow something, I don't remember what, but he heard me out there playing the guitar, and we had known each other and we had talked. He'd never heard me play before, and he said, guitar's not your first instrument, is it? I said, no. He says, what was it? I said, saxophone. He said, you play with an accent. And I didn't, it's true, I started playing woodwinds when I was 8 and the saxophone when I was 12. And there is this well-known phenomenon that when you learn a language early or when you learn an instrument early, you speak it like a native. I didn't start guitar till I was 20, and Carlos heard the subtle difference. Now, nobody else has ever accused me of starting guitar late. I've been playing for 45 years now.
Yeah.
But he tuned into something, and I don't know what it was, but it was a testament to his ear that he heard kind of like a saxophone accent.
Let's add another wrinkle to our conversation here. Music, the brain, and disease. How is it possible that a profoundly disabled person who cannot pick up a piece of food with a fork and get it to his mouth can sit behind a piano and sound like Oscar Peterson? How does that happen?
Well, so we studied this with Williams syndrome. This is one of the first things I studied in my career. Profoundly developmentally disabled people with bad motor control, but somehow musical circuits exist separately from other circuits in the brain. This leads us to believe, contrary to what Steven Pinker has said, that music is simply auditory cheesecake and an evolutionary accident. It leads us to believe that music ability was an adaptation, an important part of our heritage genetically. And this is what allows music to be medicine in the case of Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis. It's what allows musicians to overcome stuttering when they sing, even though they stutter when they speak, such as Elvis Presley.
Mel Tillis,
Kendrick Lamar. So the music circuits act as a secondary way of expressing oneself, and they co-opt the brain and overtake the damaged circuits.
Bobby McFerrin, Don't Worry, Be Happy. He's got Parkinson's.
He does.
He's still performing. What does that do for him?
You know, I've known Bobby for a long time. He's visited the lab at McGill. We've performed together, and I knew when I was writing this book that I wanted to talk to him because his music has been healing for so many, including me. And I was devastated to learn when I called him that he had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's. He was very depressed when he learned it. One of the things that led to the diagnosis was that he couldn't do things with his voice that he wanted to do, that he had always been able to do.
And his voice is a percussion instrument, right? In a way that others is not.
It's an everything instrument.
Yeah.
It's an amazing instrument. And he didn't start singing till he was 20. So, you know, according to Carlos, maybe he sings with an accent.
Right.
But what it does for him is it sets the disease aside. He performs not so much for the audience anymore, but for himself. It's very difficult for him to get up in the morning and he does shows now at noon because the evenings are bad time for him. He sings from noon to 1:30 at the Freight and Salvage in Berkeley. And I know it sounds extravagant, but anybody here in our listening audience who can get there, it is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. No two concerts are the same. It's all pure improvisation. Audience members can join him on stage. And what it does for him is, although it's hard to get there, once he starts singing, he comes alive. Certain sequences of neurochemicals are released. Dopamine, a motivating chemical. Serotonin, which boosts his mood. Cortisol decreases, the stress hormone, which would otherwise make it hard for him to function because of the stress of knowing that he's going to die of this disease. All of that lasts for days after he sings, and it's a wonderful self-medication.
Having said that, Linda Ronstadt has Parkinson's. She doesn't sing anymore, and apparently the music is not helpful to her. How come?
Linda and I talked about this. She lost so much. Parkinson's manifests differently in every person, and Linda, years ago, lost the control over her voice that she needed to have to do what she does. And it's tragic for her, it's tragic for us. But she's a very engaged, bright, intelligent person who reads a lot. She has a full life, but yeah, not involving music.
Joni Mitchell. You know Joni very well. You visited her place frequently after she had her stroke in hopes of helping to bring something back. What did you two do?
Well, it goes back to the early 2000s when Joni was asked to make for a Starbucks record label, if you remember that, a desert island disc. What are her favorite songs that she would want? And she had me over to her home. We spent many late nights spinning her records, going through her CDs, and just having the greatest time listening to music we both loved. And then, you know, I was a fly on the wall as she kind of said, well, maybe I'll put this on the CD, maybe this. And Dan, do you think it would be weird if I put on 2 songs by Deep Forest? Can I do 2 of one artist? And can I put on one of my own? And we had a great time. And so years later, when she is home recovering from her aneurysm stroke and can't yet speak, I suggested to the nurses, play that desert island disc. We know by definition that is her favorite music. And she really had previously not responded to much going on in the environment, being so disoriented. But when those songs came on, Steve, it allowed her to reconnect with a self she had lost, to find herself, her core again. And then after listening to that for a couple of weeks, I suggested that they dig deep. You know, there's Edith Piaf on there, play a whole Edith Piaf album. This is where it is in her living room. It's on this part of the shelf, I remember. Play Steely Dan. She loves Steely Dan. This is where you'll find that. And they did. And I wouldn't go so far as to speculate that music was the reason for her extraordinary recovery, but it was certainly the catalyst, coupled with an indomitable will, an intensely driven personality that she was going to beat this.
Does it make sense to you that music can have that much impact on somebody's recuperative powers?
It certainly makes sense for somebody who's a musician and whose life is music. And I would say musician includes a lot of us, people who are not necessarily performers or writers. If you are moved by music, I would say you have great musicality and you can call yourself a musician. My former student, Susan Rogers, who was Prince's recording engineer, doesn't play an instrument, but when Miles Davis came in to collaborate with Prince, he said to Susan, you are one of the greatest musicians I ever met.
That's all right.
And she doesn't play an instrument.
This is a very weird stat, or maybe not. You tell me. The 7 in 10 British musicians who suffer from panic attacks or depression suffers it at a rate 3 times that of the general population. Why?
Being a professional, we don't really know, but being a professional musician carries with it a lot of hazards that being a good amateur musician don't. Trying to make your living as a musician, being subject to scrutiny in front of a crowd, wondering if you still have the respect of your peers. Have I sold out? Am I still relevant? Ensuring that you are somehow being true to your artistic self and also pleasing your public, your audience. That's a very stressful job.
You referred a moment ago to music that can make you cry. And I want to ask you that question. What song, when you play it or when you listen to it, can make you cry?
Well, there are so many. One of them is The Randall Knife by Guy Clark, a song about his dead father and throwing the ashes out to sea. And realizing what his father stood for. It's a very powerful song. And I knew Guy, and he recorded it 3 times because he felt that he hadn't quite gotten it right. The 3rd recording is the one you want. Another one is Joni's Amelia, that last line, maybe I never really loved, I guess that is the truth. I spent my whole life in clouds at icy altitudes. And looking down on everything, I crashed into his arms. Oh, Amelia, it was just a false alarm. Even that wasn't really love.
Are you getting more emotional because of the lyric or the tune? Because you didn't sing it right now, you just said it. So I wonder which it is that has a more profound influence on you.
Well, for me, the lyric is so poignant, and I remember right before David Crosby died, we were talking about that song and how much it meant to both of us and how it made both of us cry so deeply. And we asked ourselves that question. Is it the lyric? Is it the music? Is it her voice? It's the whole package. Because I've heard other people do Amelia and it doesn't get me, and I've heard people recite the line and it doesn't get me the same way. It's all of it. It's all of me.
Why not take all of me? Did you see Tracy Chapman do Fast Car at the Grammys a couple of years ago?
I was crying like a baby.
Right.
And especially that, what was the name of the singer who, it escapes me.
I didn't give it because I didn't know him. Now, I know he's huge in country music right now, but I didn't know him.
I'm embarrassed that I've lost his name because I knew it, but the fact that he didn't change the gender in the song, I have a job as a checkout girl, I mean, that spoke a lot.
Say it again, Sheldon. Luke Combs.
Yeah, Luke Combs. Yeah. Fantastic. And Tracy is very reclusive. She bought herself 10 acres in Northern California off the coast. She doesn't like doing interviews. She didn't like being a celebrity. This was a real triumph. And what an I spend pages dissecting the song. What a song that is.
It's interesting, when I asked you the question, you gave me 3 examples of sort of modern popular music, at least modern by our standards.
Yeah.
You didn't say anything classical. Is there anything of classical music that can make you cry?
Absolutely. Mahler's Second by Tilson Thomas makes me cry with awe. Because it's a piece I never understood until I heard him conduct it live with Edwin Outwater conducting the backstage supplementary orchestra.
Is Michael Tilson Thomas?
Yeah.
Where'd you see him do it?
San Francisco.
Okay.
Certainly Beethoven's Seventh. And part of that is because I played it in school and I feel a more intimate connection to it. But yeah, and anything by Debussy.
Okay. Some of us are into Frank Sinatra. Others among us are into alternative garage grunge. Is there something different about our brains that accounts for that?
No. Well, yes. Well, no.
Which is it?
Our brains are literally wiring themselves up to the music we hear in the womb because we hear through the amniotic fluid. You might say it's a womb with a view.
You're here through Thursday, try the veal.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But no, from the first 15 years of life, we're creating massively creating new neural pathways, wiring ourselves up to the experience of the world. That music gets in there, and it shapes the music we will want to hear the rest of our lives. We all have a sort of adventuresomeness dial. Some of us want to expand out of that. Some of us want to hew very closely to it. But some people like heavy metal, some people like country, some people like classical. And there are distinct brain activations going on with the different genres. Certainly hip-hop activates the more rhythmic centers in the cerebellum. Classical, the more tonal centers in the frontal lobe. But when you look at the emotional centers in the limbic system, activation is virtually identical regardless of the genre if it's music you like and you're responding to emotionally. And that is the reason, that's the core reason why music has medicinal value. It's that any kind of music that works for you can boost your immune system, it can boost your mood, it can help T cells and NK cells travel to the site of an infection because of that emotional impact it has on you, not because of the notes or the rhythms per se.
We got a couple of minutes left here. I want to do one serious question and I want to do one not so serious question. At the end of the book, you reference Northrop Frye, who's a big deal in this country, and composer Kent Nagano, or Nagano? How does he say it? Nagano. Okay.
Conductor Kent Nagano.
Conductor.
Montreal Symphony, yeah.
To hammer home the point that the arts are a fundamental part of being human. And we know that when school boards run into trouble, one of the first things they cut if they need to find money is the music program. What do you think we lose if society loses music and the arts?
Well, I mean, I'm just a simple country neuroscientist. This isn't really my domain. But, you know, Northrop Frye and Kent Nagano and others who have thought deeply about this would say, without the arts, we cannot connect to people whose thoughts and experiences are different from our own. We reject them intellectually. But the arts can open our hearts, and when that happens, the mind follows. Without the arts, we cannot engage in acts of imagining a world different than the one we're in, and if we can't imagine a better world, we can't create it.
That's pretty sweet. Do you want to end with the Calvin Coolidge joke?
Which is?
I'm not going to tell it. It was in here.
Yeah, so Calvin Coolidge was touring a farm with his wife.
Former president.
Yeah, in the United States, president of the United States. And his wife is out looking at the chickens, and he's out looking at the sheep. And she sees that there's this rooster in this cage of hens, and she asks the guide, she says, that rooster seems pretty busy. And the guide says, yes. She says, you only need one rooster for these 200 hens? Oh, yes, he can go at it all day long. And she said, would you tell that to Mr. Coolidge? So they send an aide over to President Coolidge. You know, Mrs. Coolidge wants you to know there's a rooster in there and he's going at it all day long. And Coolidge says, same hen? No, sir, different hens. Tell that to Mrs. Coolidge.
I thought we had to end from the sublime to the ridiculous, so there we go.
I tell the story because it illustrates the idea that we are omnivores in terms of music, that you should not listen to the same song all the time. Same song? No, listen to different songs.
So I've got to change the station occasionally from Seriously Sinatra to something else.
I would say so.
You would urge it. Daniel, you've done it again. I heard there was a secret chord, music as medicine. This is your brain on music. We remember we had you here for that before. Keep it going. That's Daniel J. Levitin, in here from San Francisco, but he's also a Canadian citizen as well.
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
Maybe the biggest misconception is that milk is milk. Like, it doesn't really matter where milk comes from.
Food has never been safer, and people have never been more afraid to eat.
So we need to be transparent. We need to be open as an industry and as our own farm. We have nothing to hide.
Most cows are on a much more intensive health and nutrition program than most people.
What we make is a premium product, and our goal is to have it remain accessible to the general public.
Cows have been domesticated alongside people for at least 5,000 years, so the modern dairy cow is certainly not a wild animal anymore. I'm Stephen LeBlanc. I'm a professor at the University of Guelph in the veterinary school. I teach veterinary medicine, and I do research on dairy cow health and fertility. So there's about 3,100 dairy farms in Ontario. The average herd size now is just under 100 milking cows. The smallest herds would have perhaps as few as 30. The very largest would be around 600. Typically, the milking herd would represent around half of the total animals on the farm. So from baby calves to heifers, which are the teenagers, to milking cows, and then cows get maternity leave as well, just before they calve, not after, so those are called dry cows. So if you add up all the cattle on a farm, typically there would be about twice as many animals total as there are milking cows. Cows get milked normally twice a day or 3 times a day, or if they milk themselves in automated systems, so-called robot milking, they choose to milk themselves about 3 times a day, and that milk all gets collected in a great big tank, a refrigerated tank on the farm, and typically every 2 days a large truck comes and collects milk from multiple farms, pools it together, and delivers that refrigerated milk to a processing plant. There's a lot of quality control along the way, everything from an inspector looking at the temperature of the milk, the sight and smell of the milk on the farm before it even leaves. There's a bunch of quality control checks that happen at the milk processing plant before the milk is even begins to be processed.
We do farm tours every week and they sell out. We keep the group small. I'm the general manager of our new dairy summit station. I introduce myself as a farmer's wife. And for 20 years, that was my only role on the farm, was that I was married to a farmer. I did not work on the farm. I worked in the media industry. So I would hear from downtown Toronto people who'd never been, past the boundaries of Etobicoke, perhaps, their thoughts on farming, their thoughts on food, their fears, their anxieties. And now that I'm more on the agricultural side, we really want it to be an educational opportunity. So I'm really glad that I had that time away from the farm to just hear what other people are saying, because it's serving me really, really well now as I talk to people about what we do here on the farm.
The quality of the milk and the safety of the milk is better now than it was when my father and uncle were milking the cows, and certainly better than when my grandfather was milking the cows. My name's Ben Lowith. I'm one of the family members here at Joe Lowith and Sons Dairy, and a co-owner with my father and my uncle. So we're milking about 480 cows, 490 cows 3 times a day. We're about 5 times the size of the average Ontario farm. But if you go to the United States, there's, I think in California, the average size dairy farm would be about 1,500 or 2,000 cows. There's a few farms in the States that are milking 30,000 cows. If you go to the United Arab Emirates or China, there's farms that are milking 80,000 cows. So we would be a large farm for Ontario, but a small farm on international scales. There's a lot of choice out there. There's conventional milk, there's A2 milk, there's organic milk, there's grass-fed milk, but the standards with respect to the animal care and the quality of the milk is the same regardless of what choice you choose. Generally, the difference between these types of milk that you might see in the grocery store have more to do with how the animals are housed, the type of feed the animals are getting, but the general care of the animals, it is the same governing body that maintains regardless of how that milk is being produced.
Milk is mankind's basic food. Milk is also the basis of a great variety of foods, from Sister's ice cream cone to Brother's generous helping of butter.
I like a lot of butter so that I see my teeth marks in it. Like, that's not enough butter for me. I'm Bill Van Ness, owner of St. Bridget's Dairy. Our cows are organic and grass-fed, and we use regenerative farm practices. We milk about 200 Jersey cows. In Canada, we have the Canadian Code of Practice for dairy animals, and being organic certified and animal welfare approved, we go beyond those standards. There's nothing in there that the cows have to be outside. It does talk a little bit about calves, but not in the context that we have here.
Cows do form social connections, or at least social familiarity. They're a herd animal.
So it's just like kids in a classroom, that if you have 35 kids in a classroom and you move 3 more kids in halfway through the school year, none of those kids are learning anything because they're so focused on who these new kids are in the classroom. Well, cows are the same. If you move new animals into a group, it disrupts their patterns. They don't know who these cows are. Is this a boss cow? Is this a timid cow?
In the latest round of the Code of Practice, it's going to evolve that calves will need to be housed in social groups, because in the past, and sometimes still in the present, we'll house baby calves individually, within sight and sound of one another, but individually because that's a biosecurity thing to prevent disease from spreading from one to the other if it happens. All dairy farmers in Ontario, as all dairy farmers across Canada, are part of a mandatory quality assurance program called ProAction. So there are mandatory inspections and self-assessments and third-party checks of various measures of cow welfare. So for example, if cows are lame, if cows are too thin, if cows had injuries like lumps and bumps on their legs, all of these things are measured, monitored. If they ever deviated outside of norms, then farmers are required to have a corrective action plan to make those things better.
Building a top-producing dairy herd is a lifetime job. Fred is one of the best because he has good cow sense. To him, a cow is not just a piece of farm equipment.
We have our mission statement that's up at the front of the parlor. And one of the points on that mission statement is that we will meet the needs of every cow every day. Animal welfare will be of paramount importance. And what that means to me, and I hope it means to everybody else that's working on the farm, is that if there's something going on with a cow in her life, that might not be a very important day in my life. But for that cow, that's the most important day of the year in her life. So the care that she gets or doesn't get within the next hour is going to impact the rest of her year, the rest of her life potentially. And so what that means on our farm is that when we see an animal that needs attention, that she gets the attention that she needs on her timeline, not on our timeline.
The wonder of cows is that they can turn plant material that's not edible by people, not digestible by people, into really high quality food for humans. They do that by fermenting plants in their rumen. One of the byproducts of that is methane. And methane is one of the potent, although short-lived, greenhouse gases that contributes to climate change. And about 8% of a cow's energy may come out as methane. And fun fact, it comes out their front end, not their back end. It's burps, not anything else. The Canadian dairy industry has collectively got together and said that they are going to achieve net carbon neutrality for the industry as a whole by 2050. There's a lot of science being done. There are some feed additives, everything from essential oils. One of them is based on seaweed. There's another one that's just come onto the market that can reduce cows' methane burps by up to 30%. Canada is one of the first countries in the world that can do genetic selection of the cows for less methane emissions. It's a nice win-win. They more efficiently convert the plants they eat into milk with a bit less methane. And so as we start stacking up some of these nutritional tweaks and genetic selection and manure management, all of those things are going to hopefully help get us to that net zero in the next 25 years.
Bare ground releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We keep it covered by a variety of ways with cover crops and perennial grasslands. About 2/3 of our acres are covered with perennial grasses, either pasture or hay ground. We use cover cropping. We keep as much cover on the soil as we can. We basically are incorporating that litter, that grass material into the earth again. That's how the prairies were made. That's how topsoil is created. We are recreating topsoil here at St. Bridget's Dairy. I view the herd as an entity for land rejuvenation. The larger the herd, the more impact. Like if we think of the buffalo herd and the millions of animals in a herd, that's how the prairies were created. A herd of 10 cows grazes totally different than a herd of 50 cows, than a herd of 200 cows. We can get much more herd effect by having enough cows to create a tramp effect, to incorporate that litter into the soil and create new topsoil.
We certainly get a lot of people asking about organic. Our farm is not organic. And my follow-up question when they ask, is your milk organic, is what are you looking for? I often hear that they think that organic means that the cows are treated better. So we're in the barn right now and you don't really hear any mooing. that means the cows are happy. All of their needs are met. It's kind of like kids, right? You know, if their babies are crying, it's because they're hungry or they're uncomfortable or they need attention. And all of the cows are kind of the same, and it's quiet in here. We want to make sure that people know that it's all about the cows and their welfare. So I think sometimes the marketing buzzwords get thrown at people, and so they're just asking for those words without really knowing what it is that they're asking for. Are your cows grass-fed? Well, they are, but you know, they don't necessarily go out on pasture, but they eat grass. So what are you looking for? You know, can they roam free? Well, it was a downpour last week. The cows wouldn't want to be out in that. And in Canada, we have such extremes between heat and cold that our goal is to keep them comfortable, which is almost better for them than just being able to roam free.
We feel our cows need to experience snow, rain. It's okay. We don't need to baby our cows inside. We feel that cows need to be outside to express their natural behavior. Having the cows on pasture is a big part of the animal welfare certification.
If you gave a cow the choice to be inside, outside, or wherever she wanted to be, some researchers in Western Canada have done that. And what they've found is that in warm weather, cows will actually choose to be indoors during the day. They don't like the heat. Comfy for a cow is anywhere from a little below freezing up to about 20 degrees Celsius. After that, they start to feel the heat. They don't particularly like to be out in the blazing sun. Most modern dairy cows now are housed indoors where they can have a climate-controlled environment, comfy beds, and that nutrition that we want them to get. So paradoxically, in some ways, cows have almost outgrown living on pasture alone. Most cows are on a much more intensive health and nutrition program than most people. The best analogy would be an Olympic or a professional athlete. You know, the amount of science and monitoring that goes into cows' health programs and nutritional programs is literally at that professional athlete level.
Each cow gets her ration of grain while she's waiting to be milked. Curb service is something they appreciate.
Their nutrition has to be really finely tuned, and so for that reason, we mostly deliver their feed to them. It's feeds they would naturally eat: grass, corn, alfalfa, soybean meal, etc. But it's put together in cow casserole, total mixed ration, so that, at least in principle, every bite that they eat is really well formulated to meet their requirements for energy and amino acids and vitamins and minerals and so on and so forth.
The question is, what does quality milk mean? Is it just a Bacto scan or somatic cells, how many white blood cells are in the milk, or free fatty acids, how well it froths? Or is it more, how is that milk produced? How often is that cow outside? Can that cow participate in nature? Can that cow function as a herd? When a customer buys St. Bridget's Creamery butter, what they're getting is that direct connection right to the farm.
The driver of each tank truck is also a trained grader. He must test the milk at each pickup point before he pumps it aboard.
All milk is safe and nutritious, whether it's produced conventionally or in the organic system. In Ontario, around 3% of the total milk supply is organic and not using pesticides on the crops that cows may eventually eat. But it's important that there's rules in all systems, in the conventional system as well. If two cows ate the same diet, the same grass, corn, soy, etc., one of which was produced conventionally, one of which was produced organically, the nutritional profile of that milk, the energy, the protein, the fat, would be basically identical. There's a little bit of a twist in that some organic standards require so many days of pasture of eating grass, and when cows eat grass, whether it's organic or conventional, that does change the fatty acid composition of the milk.
If you were buying organic milk in the grocery store, it would still be pooled milk, but from multiple organic farms. Same with grass-fed or other varieties of milk. It is generally speaking still a pooled milk supply, unless you're buying directly from an on-farm processor where it is labeled that this is from this family. It is from their cows, their feed protocols, their genetics of their cows. So that is a slightly different type of milk than the rest of the milk that's in the grocery store. The milk that you would typically buy in the bags, that you get 3 bags in a larger bag, that would be a mix of milk from different farms. All of those farms have to meet the same quality standards as any other farm in Canada. So these days, the milk that you would buy in the grocery store, and quite frankly, the food that you would buy in a grocery store, period, the food quality and safety is better now than it has ever been. Where the difference is going to come in is on the milk side, is different farms are going to have different genetics. They're going to be selecting the cows differently. We're not skimming the cream off. So the milk that we're selling would be full fat milk as whatever is coming from the cows. Right now our cows are averaging about 4.2% fat, whereas in the grocery store the highest you can buy is about 3.25. And so there's going to be definitely a different flavor profile because of that. So it's that single sourced milk, when you're buying it from a known farm, there's going to be differences in the flavor of the milk because now it's not a pooled milk supply.
The milk produced by St. Bridget's Dairy is not mixed with other organic farms. We definitely have a strong element of terroir here. For example, we don't grow alfalfa, we only use red clover hay and grass hay. The red clover is much sweeter than alfalfa. I don't know if you've ever done this as a child, but if you suck that, you get that real sweetness. You can just taste it. We feed fresh feed, direct cut every day when we're short of pasture, like now, so we can retain that rich yellow color of the butter through the beta-carotene.
At Summit Station, we process, meaning pasteurize, separate, bottle our own milk, and then we sell directly to customers. A big part of what we are trying to do with this place is create a community hub. We're meeting neighbors that we wouldn't have met otherwise. When we opened the doors to the store, obviously there was a lot of customer interaction. And the thing I noticed the most was how much people actually didn't know about some of the words that we associate with milk. Pasteurization, homogenization. They just know homo milk from the grocery store. A lot of people want raw milk and they actually don't know what that means. And we'll ask, what will you do with your raw milk if you had it? And they'll say, well, we'll boil it on the stove and then we'll make cheese or whatever. I said, well, we've done the boiling for you and now you can take this milk and go make your cheese. And then the homogenization, that's been a really, that's been a tricky one for people to learn because in the store, the 3.25% milk is called homo milk. But really all the milk in the grocery store is homogenized. It's all homo milk. A lot of on-farm dairies in the province are not homogenizing, so they'll call it cream line or non-homogenized or unhomogenized, and that just means that that cream rises to the top.
There's a bunch of quality checks from both sort of nutritional standpoint and food safety standpoint. There's a big focus in veterinary medicine and dairy farming on preventive health care for cows, but cows sometimes get sick, and sometimes that illness needs antibiotic treatment, which is typically only a few days long.
That animal would receive those antibiotics for a period of time as prescribed by the doctor. During that time, that milk has to be discarded, and in Ontario, every single load of milk from every single farm in Ontario is tested for antibiotic residue, and the fines are absolutely huge if that were to ever happen. So there basically is 0% chance of an animal that is on an antibiotic of that milk getting into the food system. And the farmers themselves, I've been going to industry meetings for 25 years, and there is no pushback on this type of system. Everybody knows how important it is that the consumers have confidence in the product that we're putting on the shelves.
So, important piece of biology, cows are mammals, right? They only make milk after they give birth, no different than any other mammal, including people, which some people sort of forget. So fertility and reproductive management is a big part of dairy farming and veterinary medicine. All milk has some hormones in it. It's a biological fluid. So there's no such thing as hormone-free milk. But what we're talking about is physiologic levels. So for example, cows are often pregnant while they're lactating. And so there's going to be progesterone, which is the pregnancy hormone. Some of that is in the milk. It always has been, always will be. That's just how it is. But the key thing is that, number one, that's all with approved products that have jumped through a lot of scientific and regulatory hoops, and it's all within physiologic limits. So in other words, whether a cow had that intervention or not, the composition of her milk, the hormone level in her milk is no different than it would be if she was just living her life completely naturally.
I would say that a misconception out there is that milk is milk. Like it doesn't really matter what cow or how it's raised or what environment it's in, but it does matter. It does matter what it's fed. It matters how they're handled. It matters what breed they are. Like each breed has its own special attributes.
What commonly heard misconception is a factory farm. I'm not sure what a factory farm is. It sounds bad. I think a lot of people mean it's a large farm, but in fact in Ontario, all farms are family farms.
I don't know of any farms in Ontario that are corporations in the sense that they are owned by non-working shareholders. Even the largest ones are still family farms with the family members contributing to the day-to-day labor of the farm.
And in fact, as farms get bigger, they in some ways have to get better, more organized, more sophisticated. So cow care, cow welfare, cow health is as good on big farms as it is on small farms. There's really no differentiation there. And so that, I think, is a misconception sometimes, that smaller equals family or smaller equals better. Not necessarily.
There's two categories of people who enjoy our butter. People who can afford it, use it for everyday use. They've come to get that connection that the butter is like a good cheese. Why not buy a good butter? And also we have the demographic that buys the butter for special occasions. In similar way you'd buy a good cheese for if you have friends over. My favorite thing about, basically, it's not just my job, it's my vocation, my life, is experiencing the senses. I love the way the cows smell. The sound of a cow is just so calming, and the sound of grazing. The highlight is being able to taste the fruit of our labor with the butter that we produce from our own cows.
There's so much research that's still going into dairy farming. When my grandfather was milking cows, the idea of animal welfare was that if the cows have feed and water, you are doing a good job of taking care of those animals, that all they needed was feed and water. And then when my father and my uncle took over the farm, the idea grew that that's not enough. And now we've taken that one step further, that cows are social animals, that not only from their health, their environment, the light, the quality of the feed, the quality of the water, cows like stable social groups. So that's changed how we house the cows, how we group them. So it's fascinating how we've gone from they need feed and water to we're taking care of their social dynamics and the strangers that they meet or who their friends are. And what's fascinating to me is there's no doubt that 20 years from now we'll be doing things different and looking back at what we did today and saying, we could have done a better job, but we didn't know back then.
Well, the number of dairy farms in Ontario is slowly decreasing, as it is in most of the developed dairy world. And the farms that remain in the industry are slowly getting a little bit larger, and they're certainly getting much more sophisticated and technological.
Some operate with the latest in equipment and techniques.
Canada is one of the leaders in adoption of so-called robotic milking or automated milking systems where the cows can go and choose when they wish to be milked during the day. Probably the majority of cows in Ontario now wear Fitbits, activity monitors. And there's some really cool high tech in there that monitors their level of activity, can monitor their level of rumination, so chewing their cud, which is a health indicator. So it's, you know, there's a bit of an old-fashioned view of farming as being kind of parochial and old-fashioned and maybe a bit stuck in its ways, and nothing could be further from the truth. It's actually a high-tech industry. There's a nice level of generational renewal with younger people getting into the industry because it's not so much back-breaking work. It's still a lot of hard work, but it's not, you know, less manual labor, more data, more technology, more sophistication, and again, that's all in support of giving cows a good quality of life and making a more efficient and lower carbon output system. So we're on a good track here, at a good trajectory.
Transparency is really important. So that's why we have a big window in the store so you can look into the processing area and see what we're doing, see how the milk is being used. And it's the same with doing the tours, that we want people to come and see the cows and ask their questions.
The people who are making the food today, they genuinely care about the quality of food that they're making, that it is important to them. It's really quite hard to make a bad decision with respect to the food that you're buying these days.
And that is the agenda for Monday, October 14th, 2024. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Is Ontario experiencing a gold mining boom? We'll unpack that question tomorrow. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.